Welcome back to the Daily Dope Show. I'm Brando, the Weed Commando, and we have a couple reports to look at today. And this is not good. Not good at all. So this report is talking about the international global war on drugs and how it's been a failure. And just go ahead and read it. The United Nations drug strategy of the past 10 years has been a failure, according to a major report by the International Drug Policy Consortium, which has called for a major rethinking of global policy on illegal narcotics. And here's the report. I will link this and the other report in the description below. Now, if you don't know who the International Drug Policy Consortium is, they're kind of like a international version of Drug Policy Alliance, maybe, if you're familiar with them. So the report claims that the UN efforts to eliminate the illegal drug market by 2019 through a, quote, war on drugs approach has had scant effect on global supply while having negative effects on health, human rights, security, and development. And one could easily take this timeline they got right here and reverse it all the way back to the beginning, because every outcome that they were hoping, or that, you know, if the drug war was to advertise itself, it would bill itself as a way to protect the public from illegal drugs by eliminating the illegal drugs. But really, that's not the plan at all. The plan for the drug war is to fight drugs. And really what it does is it's a war against the people. The drugs are still there. The drugs are everywhere. You can't eliminate the drugs. So if that was part of your business plan, that failed miserably. If you wanted less people on drugs, that failed miserably. If you wanted less drugs everywhere, that failed. Drugs are cheaper. Drugs are more potent. There's more drugs. So this is really this is not news to anybody that pays attention to this stuff at all. But I guess, you have to make a report so that people talk about it, maybe think about changing their policies, but it's highly doubtful that this report is going to make any. In fact, we know this isn't going to do anything, because what we seen just a couple weeks ago was that Trump went to the United Nations, and instead of answering any questions about what he's doing in Yemen, or what he's doing in with Saudi Arabia as a ally to do things in Yemen and in Syria, he don't answer any of the concerns about what people are saying about that. He goes there and talks about this drug war and how he's going to expand it, and then he gets 129 countries to sign up on it. So I don't see this report really moving the needle on any policy, but let's go ahead and read the rest of the article. According to the report, drug-related deaths have increased by 145% over the last decade, with more than 71,000 overdose deaths in the United States in 2017 alone. Now, this report, time and time again, is going to have numbers that, to me, don't really feel like they punch you in the face hard enough. And the reason for that is because they only rewind this 10 years. And if you remember correctly, the opioid epidemic, quote unquote, began more like 30 years ago, or a little bit more, really. But that's basically what happened. Was over the last 30 years or so, deaths have increased, more opioids have been, the opioid prescription world has been more lenient about giving people prescriptions for opioids, and this is all by design of lobbyists and big pharma companies, Meanwhile, you got the heroin coming in, and within the last 20 years, you have the 9/11 happening, and then the CIA ramping up the heroin operations in Afghanistan to the point where, that now over 1 million hectares are being poppies are being produced in Afghanistan. When the before we invaded, it was like a little bit over 200,000. So when they show you the numbers in this report, it's like, oh, that's not that big of a bump. But if you rewind the clock back 20 years and compare that to now, the bump is like 3-4 times bigger. So, this report could have done a little bit more justice, in my opinion, by rewinding the clock even more. So, like, why don't we just rewind the clock right back to Nixon starting the war on drugs? Why can't we do that? Because that's basically the United Nations treaties is what kind of pushed his hand into doing it. If we can start there, we can get some real numbers. But this is when they really started their own study, and they got real hard data numbers. So let's get back to the article. At least 3,940 people were executed for drug offenses around the world over the last 10 years, while drug crackdowns in the Philippines resulted in around 27,000 extrajudicial killings. And I don't know how much of that you can just lay right at Duterte's feet, or how new the policy of executing people for drugs is, but I would have to say that in my estimation, in the 2 years that Duterte's been in power, he has for sure, you could lay the deaths of at least 20,000 people at his feet, if not all 27,000, if not more of those deaths. The IDPC, a network of 177 national and international NGOs concerned with drug policy and drug abuse, is urging the United Nations General Assembly Special Session on Drugs to consider a different approach to narcotic strategy for the next 10 years in a run-up to a March 2019 summit in Vienna, Austria. Quote, "This report is another nail in the coffin for the war on drugs," said Anne Fordham, the executive director of the IDPC, in a prepared statement. Quote, "The fact that the governments and the United Nations do not see fit to properly evaluate the disastrous impacts of the last 10 years of drug policy is depressingly unsurprising. Governments will meet next March at the UN and will likely rubber stamp more of the same for the next decade in drug policy. This would be a gross dereliction of duty and a recipe for more blood spilled in the name of drug control." Let's face it, man, that's really what it is. And drug control, if that's what you're calling it, you got your Controlled Substances Act and Controlled Substances List. These are misnomers. You're not controlling anything. And what you're doing is you're creating criminal black markets by making things illegal that people want to do, and you're not going to stop human will to do drugs. That's just never going to happen. That's a fantasy. Like this drug-free America thing, that's a fantasy. You are fantasizing, you're dreaming, you're an idiot, first of all. We have caffeine, nicotine, alcohol. Those are all legal. This is a drug-induced country, not a drug-free one. It'll never be drug-free. This country represents 5% of the entire world's population. Somehow, we use 80% of the world's drugs. Whether you're talking about illicit drugs or drugs produced for prescription purposes, we gobble up 80% of the whole world's drug supply. We only represent 5% of the whole world's population. How does that even figure? It almost seems like the whole world's drug production and manufacturing, all that shit, is monitored and controlled by a central agency. I wonder who that could be. And everybody's trying to sell as many drugs as they can to America because that's where the market is. So it's a big fat failure, and it's hypocrisy at the grandest scale. And it's the most tyrannical policy that we've had in human history. Prohibition is. Let's face it. There's never been any kind of maybe religious tyranny might be a little bit close to it, but this is just absurd. That basically, because you use drugs, you can get anything from thrown in prison, taking all your possessions and thrown in a cage, or maybe we'll just put you in put a hood over your head and throw a noose around your neck and kick the floor out from under you, like they do in the Philippines or many other countries where extrajudicial killings for using drugs is a regular everyday thing. And like Saudi Arabia, they do it in the public square. That's our ally. That's somebody that Trump's buddies with. And it ain't just Trump. It's people in both parties and Hollywood people You look at the list of people that hang out with Saudi Arabian princes and kings. It's absurd. And this is just one country that kills people for using drugs. And what it comes down to is all these failed policies are just, you think that makes it so people use less drugs? No. You want people to use less drugs? You give people something better to do. You give some people hope. You give some people a better job. Like if someone's using drugs, it's probably because they don't have nothing going on in life. They don't have any money. It's boring. The whole world's economies and the environment, everything's falling apart left and right. And you guys act like the most important thing we got to deal with is going to arrest people for selling drugs to each other. Are you kidding me? Farhan Haq, deputy spokesman for the UN Secretary General, responded to CNN's Richard on Monday. Richard. Okay. I see you. Quote, obviously there have been significant successes and failures in dealing with the problem of drug trafficking, and we've made that clear over the many remarks we've made about the drug problem each year, he said. And that's pretty much what I just said that they would say. That they're like, oh yeah, there's some, it's a failure, but what are you talking about with successes? You said there's been significant successes. Unless you're talking about from a population control and, you got real asses in coffins. What are you talking about here? What successes? I can't think of one single success that any of the drug war has ever brought anybody. Can anybody name one? Put it in the comments, please, because I can't think. I rack my brain every day thinking, what's the point of this shit? There's no success. The only success is people like the Sacklers turning into billionaires. Or people like Corrections Corporations of America making their shareholders, richer. There's no success in this drug war. It's a scam. Yeah, congratulations. You succeeded in creating distrust in every government in this whole world with this illegal lie that you call the drug war. Quote, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime is the foremost agency in the United Nations that deals with the issue. They continue to deal with the problem. It's clear from UNODC's work that they don't see the efforts as a failure so much as they see it as a task which is incomplete. And ultimately what they are trying to do and what we will continue to press nations to do is to have all countries work together to deal with this problem. Okay, whatever. That doesn't make any sense, because the policy that they are all making their own drug wars after is being a member of the United Nations and following the treaties on the drug, the drug commissions. In 2017, Mexico, for example, recorded its most murderous year on record due to soaring levels of drug-related violence. As previously reported by the CNN, Mexican National Institute of Statistics and Geography revealed that there were 31,174 homicides over the course of 1 year, an increase of 27% over 2016. That's insane. This is going on right under our border. And, you want to know why there's a giant caravan of migrants, who are coming from Honduras and Guatemala and trying to come. You know why they're doing that? I mean, there might be a few reasons why they're doing that. But one of the reasons why their countries are so blown to pieces is because of this drug war. And the reason that their countries are blown to pieces, and like everybody else is all the way to Brazil, is because people are breaking each other's backs and, cutting each other's heads off to see who could supply America with the drugs. Remember the 80% of the world's drugs we use them? Well, that's where a lot of them come through, is from all the way from South America all the way through Mexico to here. And those migrants that are coming, they're leaving war-torn areas. So yeah, the situation in Mexico is dire. The government in Mexico is considering legalizing all drugs. They're doing studies on marijuana legalization. They're doing studies on legalizing poppies. So, they're taking a proactive approach finally to the fact that we are demanding them to be our little drug runners. And, it's not like anybody denies that's what's going on. And we have the Sinaloa cartel. We have all these cartels that are competing for the trade routes and all this. And it's bloody. We remember just a couple days ago the bus full of high school students that was kidnapped. Never heard from again. And I mean, it's just one thing after another in Mexico, man. And it's kind of all our fault. All right. So anybody that sees a bunch of people coming from south of the border up here, before you start freaking out about, immigrants trying to steal America or erase the white people out of here, that's all dumb bullshit anyway. But remember that they're leaving a war-torn area, and it's because of the drug war. It's one thing that in no report that I ever seen does everybody, I guess that's just discounted. It's not that big of a deal. I don't know why people act like that's not that big of a deal. But every major tourist city that was a tourist attraction in Mexico is now highly dangerous. There's warnings from many groups that would warn you to not go vacation in Cancun or Tijuana or even Baja in some spots. Because the drug war, they'll rob you. They'll kill you. They don't care. They'll disappear you. You see too much, you could die. Any number of reasons why these towns are just turning into like gangs fighting each other in the streets all the way to Brazil. So yeah. In addition to fueling violence, the existing policy of criminalizing drug use has also resulted in mass incarceration, the report said. 1 in 5 prisoners are currently in prison for drug offenses, many on charges related to possession for personal use. 1 in 5 prisoners in the world is currently in prison for drug offenses. So remember that when people tell you that people don't go to jail for drugs or whatever, which is bullshit. We all know that's bullshit. And also remember that America, once again, 5% of the world's population, yet 25% of all prisoners in the world are locked down under the American skies of freedom. And somebody's arrested every about 20 seconds or so for a drug offense in America. Okay, back to the article. The report also said that 33 jurisdictions retained the death penalty for drug offenses in violation of international standards. However, in March, U.S. President Donald Trump proposed making drug trafficking a capital offense in response to the country's ongoing opioid crisis. Quote, what we learned from the IDPC Shadow Report is compelling. Since government started collecting data on drugs in the 1990s, the cultivation, consumption, and illegal trafficking of drugs have reached record levels, wrote Helen Clark, former Prime Minister of New Zealand and a member of the Global Commission on Drug Policy, the report's forward. Quote, moreover, current drug policies are serious obstacles in other social and economical objectives, and the war on drugs has resulted in millions of people murdered, disappeared, or internationally displaced. Last week, Canada became the first country in the G7 group of industrialized nations to legalize the recreational use of marijuana. And yeah, it's a scathing report, and it's something I've been saying for my whole life, all along. The war on drugs is a war on people. And they'll never reach any objectives that would, make it so there would be an end in sight to the war on drugs. Because they're never going to get rid of the drugs. And you've seen the outcome after 45 years of this. All the drugs are more potent. They're more available. Legalized marijuana is a reality in most places in some level. So the war on drugs is a big fat failure. All right, we know that. What else is a big fat failure? The war on marijuana. In Alabama, I guess, we don't talk about like Mississippi and Alabama are two states, I guess, that we just don't have any hope for any kind of sensible marijuana policies to even be talked about. Why is that? Well, it's time to start getting down to business, and the Southern Poverty Law Center has released a report about Alabama's failed war on marijuana. And it's another scathing report on how big this so-called war on marijuana, or we're going to control it like a controlled substance. How do you control something that grows in the fucking ground? You can't. That's the answer. You don't control that. So in Alabama, a person caught with only a few grams of marijuana can face incarceration and thousands of dollars in fines and court costs. Marijuana prohibition costs the state and its municipalities an estimated $22 million a year, creates a dangerous backlog at the agency that tests forensic evidence in violent crimes. And by the way, we never talk enough about those rape kits, the millions and millions of rape kits from coast to coast that always get pushed aside with claims that, we don't have the money to test them. But if you have a marijuana case coming up next week, I can damn better believe they're going to have all the testing done on everything. Where do we have the money for that? There's always money to make sure people go to jail for weed. Always. And anyway, back to this. A needlessly ensnares thousands of people, disproportionately African Americans, in the criminal justice system. This report from Alabama, Appleseed Center for Law and Justice, and the Southern Poverty Law Center is the first of its kind to examine the fiscal, public safety, and human toll of marijuana prohibition in the state. The study analyzed demographic data for about 2,351 people arrested by police in Alabama for marijuana possession in 2016, along with arrest locations, in addition to examining broader impacts. The report also includes an economic analysis of the cost of marijuana prohibition conducted by two economists at Western Carolina University. The study found that Alabama and its municipalities spent an estimated $22 million to enforce prohibition against marijuana possession in 2016. Do you know how much shit you could do with $22 million in Alabama? I mean, holy shit. I know it would, it would help way more than putting a bunch of people in jail for weed. Unfreaking believable, man. Alright, so despite Shuddy's song Black and White People Use Marijuana at the Same Rates, black people were approximately 4 times as likely to be arrested for either misdemeanor or felony marijuana possession. The enforcement of marijuana possession laws has created a crippling backlog at the state agency tasked with analyzing forensic evidence in violent criminal cases. So there's a lot of things in here going on in this report. Like you have the laws, thousands arrested each year for marijuana possession in Alabama, the human toll, marijuana legalization proving beneficial to states that have done it. And it's another thing that's absurd when you live in a place like Alabama to see like all these celebratory lines of people lined up at the dispensary to buy their first legal bag of weed or whatever, whatever kind of, it's 420 and it's legal here so we can just blaze up. There's people that like to smoke weed in Alabama too. All right, and there's people that use medical marijuana as much as they can get it in Alabama as well. So when people are out there celebrating, just keep these things in mind that there's people in places like Alabama and Mississippi who are looking at prison time for little bullshit marijuana charges. And it's just fucking wrong, man. It's really sad too. They got recommendations, the fiscal costs, and about this report. And we're just going to, a couple things here. Keisha Hughes dreamed of becoming a medical assistant. Now she works an overnight shift at a chicken plant to support her children. Nick Gibson was on track to graduate from the University of Alabama. Now he works at a fast food restaurant. Wesley Shelton spent 15 months in jail and ended up with a felony conviction for having $10 worth of marijuana. Is any of this shit really worth it? I mean, it's such a big deal to ruin somebody's life. And I know the whole criminal justice system is really there just to do that. Because marijuana is one of the main things that they've enforced. Look at the statistics in 2016 and 2017. There were more arrests for marijuana possession than all violent crimes put together. A lot of those are unsolved crimes. A lot of unsolved crimes out there have to do with the police being just too tied up with this marijuana bullshit. You go to this human toll. Look at this. The county spends $21,000 to jail this man for $10 worth of marijuana. That's just absurd and obscene. I mean, it's just, there's no excuse for this drug war, guys. It is absolutely ridiculous. And this is where I kind of read a little bit about, you know, it's just ridiculous. Here's your breakdowns. So, marijuana possession arrest rates are 11 to almost 3 to 11, white to black. And sometimes they're way more depending on where you're at. You know, if you're in Huntsville, it's 11 to 1. If you're in Dothan, it's 10 to 1. It's crazy, man. It's absolutely crazy. Possession arrests for felonies. Felony possession arrests. Wow. 7 to 1. I mean, first of all, there should never be a felony possession arrest, whatever the fuck that even means. I guess that just means you have more weed than you're allowed to have. And if we look into that, I guarantee you it sure ain't much. People arrested statewide for possession code, felony, or misdemeanor. So you have like double up on felony for black arrests than white. And misdemeanors are about the same. What is this even about here? 83% of people arrested for marijuana possession were men. Okay, so those were people again. Just, you know, we've seen these numbers repeated everywhere in America. This drug war is no doubt targeting blacks and, quite frankly, you know, Hispanics as well. Anybody that's not white. And people use weed no matter where, you know, break down the demographic. Everybody uses weed at the same rate. And that's all I got on these two reports. The drug war, big fat failure. The war on marijuana, another huge failure. We deserve better, guys. We have two parties in this country that don't represent the people. We have a ridiculous amount of people that support legalizing marijuana, and furthermore, decriminalizing all drugs is becoming a big, it's becoming a new thing that I'm hearing a lot more of, whether you're talking about pundits, people like me that talk about this shit all the time, or even politicians like Ben Jealous, or other politicians like even Beto O'Rourke, who has talked about the war on drugs with a pretty heavy angle of we need to decriminalize all drugs and rethink the war on drugs, because as this report says, and as every report I've ever seen, even the UN's own reports, and when they do like listening sessions, it always comes to the same conclusion. The policies that we are examining are not working. And there's a very negative toll because of that that's happening to especially people in third world countries, especially people in Mexico and the distribution routes in the Afghanistan heroin trade. And it's time to rethink this shit, guys.